Hello, everyone, and welcome to JFK, the Enduring Secret interview series. From time to time, here at JFK, the Enduring Secret, we get a chance to interview important people in the JFK research community and others that are in some way connected to the story of the assassination. These interviews are often featured on our JFK, the Enduring Secret YouTube channel, as well as our regular audio podcast. If you found us by chance and you are not already a regular subscriber to the audio podcast, please do subscribe at your favorite podcast outlet. And please do the same over at YouTube on our YouTube channel of the same name, JFK, The Enduring Secret. Picture the scene. It's November 22nd, 1963. The nation is about to be plunged into mourning by the shocking assassination of President John F. Kennedy in Dallas. But at that very same moment, behind the closed doors of a Senate hearing room, a lone whistleblower is delivering testimony so damning it could have toppled the man about to be sworn in as the next president, Lyndon Baines Johnson. That whistleblower was Don B. Reynolds, an intrepid insurance executive who became the key witness in the infamous Bobby Baker scandal. His testimony detailed a web of kickbacks, bribes, and political favoritism that reached all the way to the White House. The allegations were so severe that under normal circumstances, they could have led to LBJ's impeachment, his removal from office, and possibly even prison time. But with the nation convulsed by JFK's death, that bombshell testimony vanished into the shadows. In the aftermath, Don Reynolds faced death threats so credible they forced him to flee the country and live in exile abroad for 4 long years, haunted by the cost of speaking truth to power. For decades, this story of courage, betrayal, and survival remained buried, a narrative whispered across generations, until now. Joining me today is the one person who can tell this story from the inside, Robert Bob Nelson, the nephew of Don Reynolds and the author of the groundbreaking book, LBJ's Mortal Wound, the Don Reynolds story. Bob is a dedicated historian who grew up immersed in his family's untold story. He spent decades honing the meticulous research skills that were needed to piece together this long-hidden narrative. The result is his acclaimed debut book, a riveting blend of family memoir, investigative journalism, and historical revelation. Drawing from never-before-published family archives, declassified Senate records, and secret White House tapes, Bob resurrects his uncle's whistleblower saga and explores its seismic implications. He uncovers how one man's courage collided with the ruthless machinery of Washington, forever altering the course of American history. Hailed as a political thriller, his work sheds new light on the dark intersections of scandal, assassination, and presidential ascension. Today, Bob Nelson continues to champion historical accountability, reminding us of the human cost of power and giving a voice to a story that Washington tried to silence forever. It was a gratifying moment to record this first ever interview with Bob. He is nothing less than a gentleman, and for me, the story he captured in his book is one I did my best to portray in our podcast series. It was a book that I believe was honest and told the good and the bad of his uncle's life. For that reason alone, I gave it great credibility on the podcast. That feeling was reaffirmed as I interacted personally with the affable Bob Nelson. He is a classical man of his day from the Midwest, honest, considerate, forthright, yet reserved, qualities I saw in other Midwesterners over the years. Bob found me, not the other way around, and I am so glad that he did. This is a conversation that should be heard by all who are interested in the history of that time. As much as the JFK assassination itself occupies the year 1963, the events his uncle took place in, and particularly on November 22nd, are in and of themselves historically important and not unrelated. Bob was quick, though, to remind me that his book is not about the Kennedy assassination, but rather the corruption that existed in that moment, the corruption that existed in the highest offices in the land, and how that corruption was never accounted for in the legacy of Lyndon Baines Johnson. More than anything, Bob would like to see the truth of these events be written into the history of this man we call LBJ.
First of all, I want to thank Jeff Grudell for allowing me to do this podcast. My name is Bob Nelson, or more formally Robert Reynolds Nelson. I am the author of this book, LBJ's Mortal Wound, the Don Reynolds story, available on Amazon and Kindle. It's our personal family story of the JFK assassination and the role of my uncle Don Reynolds, who was a whistleblower, the power of family secrets, the power of federal agencies, and the role of surveillance in our modern society.
And now, without further ado, let's get right to the interview.
Well, if it's possible to attract the attention without, again, making grandiose claims, but I really do feel at the end of the day that, what's the upshot of this? What's the upshot of the Don Reynolds story? That I believe that this legacy of this president should be changed in the sense that it should be enlarged, so to speak. There's a part of this man's legacy that needs to be explained. And I believe this book asks that question, or at least gives the story here to begin to open the door, so to speak. Okay. Others may join and say, yeah, I mean, let's take a look at this. But others don't want this. Obviously, there are people, in the Democratic camp that don't want this legacy to be reviewed. I want it reviewed. The triumph of the Great Society, the tragedy of Vietnam. But what happened? We lived this thing. This is not just some kind of imaginary tale, so to speak. We lived through this.
Yeah.
My gosh.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm a little bit passionate.
Well, Bob, it's a pleasure to have you on the show, JFK, The Enduring Secret. We love your book. We absolutely love your book. We read every inch of it. We tried to portray it as accurately as we could in the storytell on JFK, The Enduring Secret. And it's an amazing story. And you are, first of all, a very courageous individual to have written about a family member and to do it in such an objective fashion. And that really is the thing that caught my eye about the entire book and the storytelling. Even it's an amazing, important historical moment in the United States history broadly, but more specifically about the Kennedy assassination and the connection to the Johnson regime. And here you are telling this, this story. And so, I'm just fascinated by it. I'm always fascinated to hear from people who are doing what you're doing. You went through this journey to write this book, so let's hear what you have to say about all that.
Thank you very much, Jeff. I really appreciate your invitation and opportunity to talk about a story that's 60 years old, but I will say that it is quite a story. I was talking with a family friend last night, and he went over the story of this man, Don Reynolds, who was my uncle, who testified against Lyndon Johnson at that very moment of the assassination. He says, I saw your uncle, Don Reynolds, shoplift twice. Here we were in a small town in South Carolina, and this was years after the investigation, years after the all the stress and tragedy. Here he was I mean, he didn't need to do it, but here he was taking merchandise out of a store 2 times. So, the story goes on, but in reference to what you were saying, Jeff, some people still today don't want to use their names. It is that, shall I say, sensitive and secret. They just don't want the press around their house. And so, when I wrote the book, I respected that. I respected that request. Maybe your readers are familiar, or your readers are not so familiar about those 3 events that happened on November 22nd, 1963. I do go into the book, but I do think it does bear repeating, because I don't think in this nation's history you can have this confluence of so-called 3 rivers of historical events. You have New York. You have Life magazine in New York preparing a special story on Lyndon Johnson. You have Washington, D.C., my uncle handing over documents on Lyndon Johnson to the Senate investigators. And then you have Kennedy's car turning on Elm Street. And then you have all of this in the mayhem happening after that. It's just an absolutely a 3-for-1, so to speak.
Yeah.
An absolutely incredible story.
Hmm.
And then I didn't want to say, when I mentioned it's mentioned in the book, but I do want to say that when it was known that Kennedy had been shot, my uncle grabbed for the documents on the table, and he said to the Senate investigators, "You won't need these. I mean, testifying against the vice president is one thing, but against the president, no." And they said, "I'm sorry, Mr. Reynolds, those are our documents now. There's nothing you can do about it." My uncle was just totally stunned. As you can imagine, here we are caught up in history. Here's a man giving information now on Lyndon Baines Johnson, the president of the United States. Unbelievable.
Yeah, it's an extraordinary story. I mean, to be sitting there, I think Burkett actually recounts that and says that he learned before it was generally known to your uncle in that meeting that the president had passed. And he said he knew the only way he could get your uncle to complete the discussion,
That's right.
right? He was going to
Be
clam
quiet.
up, right?
Yeah, they climb up. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So anyway, we've got the next story of I am sitting here today talking with you. I'm sitting here today physically about maybe 1 mile away from where this next event happened, in which our house on Jefferson Avenue, I don't want to mention the particular street address for the number, but Jefferson Avenue was surrounded by the feds. My uncle fled Washington, D.C. after that, and he arrived up on our doorstep in the town of Munster, Indiana. And my mom announced that day, said, "Oh, I was 10 years old at the time," and obviously she didn't want to mention what was really happening. So he said, "Oh, your Uncle Buck is here." I said, "Oh, that's wonderful. We'll be going out to dinner." So we went out to dinner, and I tell the vignette, I believe, in the book, that we were sitting down at the table, and his assumed name was Charlie for the night. And my dad said, "Charlie, what will you have?" As they looked at the menu, and he said, "Well, I'll have, the pork chops and the green beans, whatever the case may be." And so anyway, the waitress took our order, and then unfortunately, I slipped up. I said, "Uncle Buck, I wonder what you think." He said, "Bob, shh, quiet." He says, "There could be agents over at the next table. Quiet."
That's a scary moment, right? I mean, as a kid too. I mean, I know, yeah.
Yeah, and then of course, then the agents did come. Oh, maybe about a week later, or 4 or 5 days later, they showed up at our doorstep on Jefferson Avenue, and my mom and dad drove into our garage, and we got out of the car, and she looked back. She said, "Here they come, Bob." I looked back. I saw 2 men with black coats and hats and badges approaching our garage. And they flashed their FBI badges and said, "We're looking for a man named Don Reynolds." And my mom turned to me to answer the question, a 10-year-old boy. And she said, "Oh, we haven't seen him lately, have we, Bob?" I said, "No, no, 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 we haven't seen him lately." Uh, you couldn't make this stuff up, but
Wow.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah. So
Did you have a friend? You had a friend at school too, right? That you were a little concerned about because he had brought
yeah,
up this whole
yeah,
thing?
that's right. He had been I don't say blabbing this out, and I don't want to mention his name, but yes, that's true. He was following the news. He was a history buff, and I just didn't want the stuff spread too far with my classmates. But some of that stuff, obviously, you couldn't dam all of the leaks, so to speak. So,
Yeah. Holy
wow,
smokes. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
and but again, I do wish to emphasize to the audience that the confluence of these three events, New York with Life magazine, I did speak with Jim Wagenford, who
Oh yeah. Oh.
was in that newsroom,
Hmm.
and Washington D.C. with my uncle handing over the documents in Dallas, Texas, with Kennedy's car turning on Elm Street is just an absolute unbelievable.
It was
Yeah,
Wagenford, was he, it seems like, at least the statements you make in the book is he was uh, very adamant that, Johnson was going down.
that's right.
Uh, did he convey that to you in the way he spoke about it when you talked to him?
Yes, I believe he did. Of course, I'm fixated on page 22 of the book, but anyway, he said we were developing a major news story concerning Johnson and Bobby Baker. Publication after that, Johnson would have been fishing off the 64 ticket. That's what was written in the book. I met Wagenford first in Dallas at an assassination conference in 2019, and later at his home in Yardley, Pennsylvania, during my first trip to Delaware in January 2020. So it's just, I'm not, we're not, Wagenford is not making this up, and I'm not making it up.
Yeah, yeah, for
You
sure.
know,
Yeah,
we,
yeah,
we essentially, shall we say, lived through this
yeah.
in our various ways. I mean, this is not just ancient history reading from a book. We lived through it.
Yeah. Did you feel the fear in your house? Was your mom and your dad fearful at around the time of the height of this, in 64, right, like right after the hearings, and then of course, with
Yeah,
the FBI
yeah,
agents coming to around your neighborhood? What was
yeah,
the feeling? Did you ever hear them talk about it? Were
yeah.
they?
Well, that's maybe I had mentioned once in the book, but as a 10-year-old kid, then you obviously I put in some decades of living here, but it's still within the mind. It's still within the imprint. Like when you're young, those imprints can often stay for decades. And I do remember the, shall we say, the agony and the ecstasy, the positive and the negative. Here we were in a new home that my dad had partly built from his engineering skills.
Wow.
We were in a wonderful, wonderful town. That was wonderful, and I was safe and secure on a very cold winter night. And I was about to go to sleep as a 10-year-old boy in January of 1964, I believe. And I heard some voices from my mom and dad's room, which was just, opposite mine. Um, and they kept getting louder.
Mm, mm,
And all of a sudden, my mom screamed, "Well, he's my brother."
mm.
You see, they had had this discussion regarding the FBI agents at our house and all this ruckus going on. It wasn't just Washington, D.C. This story had come to us in Munster, Indiana, and my dad just couldn't understand it.
Yeah.
And my mom defended her brothers. Well, he's my brother.
Yeah, it makes total sense. I'm sure it created the natural tension that you would expect it to in a circumstance like that. And did you know your aunts well? His wife, and I guess his second wife. I know he was married
Yeah,
twice,
she
wasn't
was she was she was a wonderful lady. Her name was Jerry. He was married three times. The second wife I knew fairly well, and I spent wonderful summers with uh, with my uncle and her, particularly at their farmhouse. in near Oakland, Maryland, and she was just a wonderful, wonderful lady. But the stress had gotten to her, and then she had moved to California to be with her sister, and then Don Reynolds and she had gotten divorced. So
Do you have a memory of a moment back at the farmhouse? I mean, that must have been a really interesting place to go and hang. Did he ever, I mean, did you spend reasonable
yeah,
amount of
well,
time
well,
with him? Yeah.
yeah, we I remember spending wonderful times, of course, with the home baked pies, for example, that my aunt would serve. And it was somewhat isolated. It was off, I believe, Highway 219, if I'm trying to remember. And I did go back there at one point, but it was a wonderful time. We played badminton, out in the yard, and then we'd go boating on Deep Creek Lake,
Mm.
and that was so much fun. Um, there were wonderful summers. Now, I didn't spend all that every summer there, but I was invited there as a nephew, and it was a wonderful time. It was a peaceful time, and whatever pressure my uncle was feeling with Bobby Baker at the time during the early '60s, this was not communicated to me.
Yeah. You were
So
probably too young, right? Really to be kind of in the fray of all that.
crave all that. Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Uh,
So it was we would call it a halcyon time or something like that. It was, I don't have to say the calm before the storm, but at least I had that as wonderful summers with him.
what prompted you to write this book? I mean, a lot of people, one of the things that I have experienced
Mhm.
is the fact that there are many families that were affected in many different ways by the events that took place around November 22nd,
Mhm.
1963. And this is one of the more higher profile events connected to all this. And chose, some families choose to simply keep these kinds of stories, to themselves, and they're locked, honestly, sort of in the vault. And you chose not to, and so obviously that's it was an important decision. And I think it's a fine one, but I'm interested in what your own thinking was. How'd you get there in your own mind?
That's a very good question. Bobby Baker, right? My uncle's business partner associate had written a book called Wheeling and Dealing, and yet his children, I think Bobby had 5 children, and none of them, as far as I know, have been in the media or have decided to intone on this. And so Bobby wrote his story, and he went back to the Senate historian to talk about his experiences. Now, the latest time he went back to the Senate historian uh, was not too complimentary with Don Reynolds. Um, in his earlier book, Wheeling and Dealing, he said Reynolds told the truth about the DC stadium. So there's somewhat of a conflict there. But I decided that, there weren't many people, shall we say, around that shall we say, been through this experience. I mean, right? Had lived through it. And so there's nobody else in my family. Don Reynolds and his wives didn't have any children. And therefore I felt, and I was his quote unquote favorite nephew. He was my godfather, as my aunt would say. That is his sister. He was the man who was going to shepherd me through life, believe it or not. So I felt that it was time for me to start gathering some information that I could, which I'm glad, the book has come out. And that would give some understanding of this man and where he was in American history and why he's part of a whistleblowing tradition.
Yeah, oh my gosh, yeah, one of the more famous ones of all time, really. And when you think about it, can you just mentioned Bobby Baker and the fact that he had differing statements between his Wheeling and Dealing book and then his Senate uh, biography.
Yeah.
And I, I just one of the most gripping moments in your book, I think, is when you tell the story where your uncle's in the Bahamas and it's the early wee morning hours, and he gets the call. He gets the call from Bobby
Yeah.
Baker. Oh God, I got to
Yeah.
say, I want you to tell that story because to me that is one of the most gripping moments in the book.
Yeah. So here he is. Here he is. He's quote unquote exiled to the Bahamas, and all of a sudden he's trying to relax, and he gets a call at what 1:30, 1:30 or 2:30 in the morning, and he says, "This is Bobby Baker." He says, "I'm making one last attempt to notify you that of your intent to testify. And Don, if you've caused serious problems for big men, they're willing to forget the whole thing. But if you come back to the States and testify as a state witness or any other, publicity, 3 words, you won't survive."
God, that's scary. He basically, right? He threatened him with his life. Threatened him with his life.
Exactly. So here is a man on the run. This is all through, I'm 10 years old, 11 years old, and I'm sure that perhaps he had shared this with his sister, Mary Lou. He perhaps had shared this phone call, perhaps with my mom and dad, but they would not obviously share that with me.
Yeah, yeah. Oh my God. So it must have been a real revelation when you finally found out about it.
Oh, it's just, you dig through the documents and at the University of Delaware, and a lot of it was the University of Delaware because John Williams was the star investigator of this, and he was from Delaware. So yeah, it was quite a revelation to see something like that. Wow.
What was it? I know you had a lot of help in research because I mean that's such a tedious thing and it takes a lot of time. It's probably more than a one person job to do something like that. Did you enjoy the research part of it? Did you enjoy reading the old documents, reading through
Yeah,
the?
I think that's a good question because, well, shall we say, you begin to peel the layers back. Wait a minute. It's like, okay, you peeled one layer back, but then all of a sudden there's this mystery, and then you begin to peel another layer back and another layer back, and this leads to this, this leads to this. So I had also worked in my job at doing some research at the University of Wisconsin. I was at the University of Wisconsin Survey Center, so I enjoyed some of the research I did there, and I found some of the value of just, I hate to say this, being a lone wolf, if you have to,
Yeah,
if you have to,
yeah, yeah.
doing this. And I realized too that, let's face it, nobody was going to go out and unearth this story as I would. So
Did you feel any, the whole Johnson thing, people who
yeah.
have written about, Billy Saul Estes and others, there's been a lot of back in the day, particularly not maybe in the time frame, obviously you were writing, but if you go all the way back before the turn of the century, even some 40 years past the assassination, there are people who were William Raymond, perhaps, is a good
Mhm,
example
mhm,
in the
mhm.
Estes case.
Yeah.
Did you ever feel or ever fear any fear that, or did you ever have any signs that people didn't want you to do this? Did you get a call? Did you get a call ever, or a threat, or anything about doing what you were doing?
No, I believe I kind of, shall we say, assumed a low profile. Maybe they don't keep your head down, so to speak, and move forward. But no, I mean, obviously, let's face it, there are books written about Don Reynolds, and there are, I'd say at the beginning of the book, there are either podcasts or shows, already on the History Channel, which anybody can turn to. Before I even wrote the book, for example, The Men Who Killed Kennedy, the History Channel, Part 9.
Mhm.
This has all been available, but the personal side of the story, uh, the family side of the story, and along with some of these archive documents, has not been told. And that's where LBJ's mortal wound comes in.
Yeah. I mean, I think you were masterful at staying on topic. Where all of the things that people were probably wanting to know about the scandal itself, but then weaving in the personal element of this because it really, I mean, it is. There was a lot of human tragedy, and this
Yeah.
was a great example. I mean, I think obviously your uncle's life was, and your whole family, including his wife and others, were their circumstance was permanently altered at the moment of the assassination and beyond.
Wow. And here we were. Bobby Baker's book came out in 1978. So, from there, I mean, that's a long time still. We're peeling back. We're peeling back the years to get to the 1978. But better late than never. And the book has come out the past 6 months to a year. And I think this will add another, shall we say, chapter and discussion story about, and I did want to emphasize to your audience that strictly, Jeff, I'm on the corruption road. I'm not on the assassination road. Some people think, well, who done it, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying who done it. I'm on the corruption road and asking that we need to reevaluate at the end point. We need to evaluate the legacy of the 36th president of the United States, not for necessarily assassination, but for corruption. If people want to extend that story into assassination, let them do that. But I'm on the corruption road.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point that you're making. I mean, I think it's pretty well documented, the level of corruption, but it's been suppressed. And obviously it's not much of a leap for some people to think that morally, if he were doing some of these other things, that maybe he had more involvement. But I'm glad you're making the clear distinction that that's what you researched and saw, and that your uncle was, a part of seeing. There were a few controversial statements that were alluded to about the assassination in the book, that maybe there was some more knowledge between people. Maybe even your uncle had heard some statements made, but then they were retracted. So I guess or corrected or something along that nature. But it is it. I think people always have a question, at least on the show that you're on today, particularly because it relates mostly about the assassination. And but we do a broader series of historical context touches in this in this whole podcast. That's the reason we're so interested in your uncle's story, because it has relevance. It isn't necessarily directly related to anything on the assassination uh, investigation itself, but it has context and it's really relevant.
Yeah, and to be thrown in, like I say, again, not to belabor this kind of thing, but to be thrown into United States history, where you have Dallas, you have New York, and you have Washington, all at the not just the same day, Jeff, but at the same minute.
Yeah.
I mean, can you get a movie going on this?
Yeah. You can't write. I mean, yeah. So when are you gonna? So when is your screenplay coming out? Right. I mean, it's really an amazing story. I'm actually surprised that there's never been, maybe it's a, a tip of the hat to the continuing legacy that the folks who hold Johnson's um, history in their hands have been able to avoid. But this is a story that's never been told on a movie, and I'm a little surprised because it's got a great movie theme to it.
Absolutely, and you've got also the film credits, as I mentioned, for example, in the book. Um, you you have a number for example, on the History Channel or Mark Rubert or whatever the case. Now I think I have 7 different film, quote unquote, credits, so to speak, that are there. So
Yeah, that's quite a bit for sure. Uh, do you uh, do you feel like John Williams was friendly with your uncle? What was that relationship? You reveal a bit in the book, but do you feel strongly one way or the other how that how that really was?
Yeah, it's absolutely amazing that the so-called, I would say, chief investigator, or what they call the conscience of the Senate, John Williams, was there at that very same time. We talk about the three events, the 3-in-1. That's incredible in itself. And then on top of that, then you have this scandal breakout, and you have John Williams essentially as a shelter helping my uncle. I don't think he would stand for some of the hanky panky that my uncle had done, but if he had not been investigating and making an attempt to open up the investigation, that would have been tough. But he was there. John Williams was there, and it was, again, what an incredible story that he was there at that time in the Senate. I think how many terms was he on? Was he a 4-term senator from Delaware, if I'm not mistaken?
Yeah, I believe he was. I believe that is correct.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
Do you, one of the other stories that I think is intriguing in the book, and it's obviously maybe it was a difficult one to tell because there was some chagrin to it, I guess. But
Yeah.
when your uncle was in the Bahamas and he either befriended or was befriended by the geologist slash scientist.
Walter Blair.
Walter Blair, yes.
Yeah, Walter Blair. Yeah.
Is there a story there too? I think that story in itself, as you tell, it's amazing. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I don't know how they got together, but Walter Blair had discovered, I believe, uranium in Canada.
Mhm.
And I've got a picture of Walter Blair and my uncle on Beale Street in Nassau. And he was a support to my uncle. And yet, I think I had recounted in the book that evidently my uncle had been a little bit loose with his checkbook.
Yeah, sounds like it. Sounds like it.
Yeah. And so he had written I think you ought to revise your story on Don Reynolds. He stole money twice from me, one time, and this, that, and the other, this, that, and the other. So that was another revelation I had gotten when I was doing some of the research.
But but honestly, Bob, I think the fact that you didn't just set that story aside, you actually placed it in the book. I mean, the story of your uncle, which is an extraordinary one, you included, all the bright spots and the warts that you found too. And I think that I think it makes the book highly genuine and highly credible. And that's why I just love it so much. And actually, it's funny. It has a little bit of a James Bond feel to it because if you go back into the '60s, and you remember, Sean, Connery and the ones that he filmed, he loved the Bahamas. Actually, I think he actually,
there you go. That's right.
right. He
That's right.
retired
That's right.
there or at least spent a good deal of his post-retirement years there. And it just has a feel. When you tell that story, it has a feel of the 1960s Bond movies.
Oh, it's just, and you look at this, for example, in one of the chapters, and the agony and the ecstasy, all the stuff was going on. My uncle's down in the Bahamas, and Senator Williams and Clark Mollenhoff flew to Nassau to update my uncle and develops on the scandal like that. And then the Internal Revenue Service is after him.
Yeah.
And I get a letter from my aunt in October 1965 saying, "Hi, darling, happy birthday all year long." In other words, they wanted to shield me. The main thing, they wanted to shield me from all this.
Yeah.
But now, as I go out and write the book, you write the memoir, and you see the incredible night and day story that was going on. It's just.
Yeah, I know it is. Do you remember as a young person ever seeing anything on television that involved your uncle? Like, did you turn the television on and see something on CBS News or?
Yeah, I think I remember a little bit of my uncle testifying, and I can't seem to place it. It was enough, I believe. My seeing it is enough verified because I had a friend in school in 4th and 5th grade who took a great interest in U.S. history, and he was going around. I don't want to use the word in the wrong way, but he essentially was going around the word blabbing about Don Reynolds to some of my classmates, and some of it was complimentary, and some of it wasn't. And I told this to my mom. I said, that so and so, my classmate, is doing this. And I said, well, Bob, honey, you tell me now if he does that anymore, I'll talk to so and so's mother and make sure that he doesn't do that, because evidently a lot of it was coming out saying that Don Reynolds did this and Don Reynolds did that, and it didn't reflect very favorably on our family. But yes, I believe I remember seeing him on television testifying, and I believe there was some headlines regarding the Bobby Baker story and Don Reynolds. So those two things, I feel fairly confident that I remember seeing.
Did and maybe it doesn't it turned out not to be something that Baker had any interest in, but the implication is that Bobby Baker got an equity interest in your uncle's insurance agency. It was never, yeah, I think the way you document it is you say he never, your uncle never issued the shares.
Right.
So he didn't technically have them in hand, but I think there was a gentleman's agreement. It sounded like that he would get, dividends, so to speak, out of that whole thing.
Right.
And was there ever any claims later by the Baker family to try to get anything out of your uncle's estate, or did he just realize there wasn't much of anything to get, so he didn't?
At that point, I think like you said, there wasn't much to get. This was during the heyday, like I mentioned about getting this of 1955, 1956. We're going back some time here, but things were really growing. The economy was roaring, and Bobby Baker and my uncle were having a great time of it. But I'm afraid that things began to blow up, so to speak, after that. And then my uncle flees to Nassau. He loses a lot, and there wasn't really much around, as far as I know.
You tell a story. This is just a small little part of the book, so I don't know how eventful it was to you, but it was scary to read it. Your uncle was obviously still in the country, but on the run, and he was on a train.
Yeah,
Uh, right? He was on a train, and
yeah,
and all of a sudden, I mean, this frightening moment comes, right? He's got what he senses to be federal agents
yeah,
that have found him on the train.
yeah.
And tell me this story because I mean,
Well,
it's a
yeah. Well, my uncle was evidently, again, I relate this to my mom because she had gotten this from the family, and then she had told that to us either at the dinner table or sometime when it was convenient. And evidently, he was fleeing the agents. He was traveling cross country by train, and he wanted to keep wanted to be so-called, as he uses his word, incognito, so to speak. And my mom related the story that I tell you, when those federal agents boarded the train and they started opening those compartment doors, she said Buck started speaking Spanish so fast to that woman, and she laughed and laughed and laughed. And Buck he went to Georgetown School for Foreign Affairs, right, or Foreign Service, and so he had some language background. He
I didn't
was
know that. Okay.
Yeah, so he could speak. I said, Uncle Buck, what languages do you speak? Oh, I speak some Spanish, some German, some French, or like that. So he had some. So that's not too far off the mark that he might be getting some, palabras and Espanol, to the lady next to him.
Oh, what a great story. Now, see, that's another one that's salad. That reminds me of, I don't know, maybe Gene Wilder on Silver Streak or something, but it definitely was a great, who done it? I'm on the train, kind of
Yeah.
Agatha Christie thing.
Mhm.
Uh, I mean, there was just so many moments it sounded like in his existence like that. Yes. One thing you mentioned though,
Mhm.
that I'm thinking about, it just came to mind. Obviously he had an honorable discharge out of the service,
Right.
but there was obviously some hanky panky back when he was over in Europe. Was there, and you don't really tell the story of that. You don't go into a lot of that. I'm not sure how much you really knew. Was there anything you were holding back in the book that, really, speculated about, or what really was it that he was involved in there? I mean, it's not real clear that maybe you even knew, but I just was wondering if,
Yeah. Yeah, he was in over there in Europe and after the war.
yeah,
That,
that's right.
yeah,
Yeah.
that he'd got involved in some quote unquote shady unquote deals in Germany. But you
Yeah.
know what? That's the unfortunately that's about where I could where the story began and end. And the story ends there because there just wasn't much to
To corroborate any of that.
corroborate
Yeah.
anything like that.
Yeah.
And I don't think he was much one for talking about it. So,
Yeah, no, I totally get that, right? Like that's not, who's gonna air all their dirty laundry on things of that nature. But it obviously, I think you end the story though in a way that says that obviously the army knew about whatever it was, and it didn't result in a dishonorable discharge. So
that's
while they
correct. That's
might not have
correct.
liked it, it didn't sound like it was anything too dramatic in that
Yeah.
regard. Do you think? Do you speculate that he was more of a bag man than was well documented? I mean, obviously these are the kind of things that are always underneath the covers, but he said it himself, I know, on multiple occasions, right? But
Yeah.
how do you feel about this? Do you think that he really did carry a lot of the water? I mean, was there a lot of money coming in perhaps to the agency that then was going back out, and it was just a cover to get it to the Democratic Party or wherever it was going?
Well, there was once, in one celebrated one, which and he's working with Bobby Baker. And I think the connection to Bobby Baker is important because, why were these two men working together? Well, they were both South Carolinians. And maybe there was some kind of tie, a human tie that people feel connected to
Hmm.
because here you are out in Washington, D.C., in the United States Senate, but they had some commonality there.
Yeah.
So Baker's beginning to direct him here, direct him there, and before you know it, he's like you said, regarding the bag man. Could he stop? Could he say, "Hey, like
Yeah.
my second aunt said, Don, we need to get out of here. I don't like the people you're associating with, whether it's Bobby Baker or whoever the case may be." And
Yeah.
that's the reason why, part of the reason he came forward on November 22nd, 1963. But
Yeah.
the initial working with him back in the late 50s and early 60s is, well, shall we say, isn't that all of us? Don't we long for a human connection and people that we can relate to?
Yeah.
And so there you go.
Yeah. I mean, what a fine explanation of all that. And you mentioned South Carolina, and I got a nice connection to that myself, actually. I often, uh, you know, have crossed that border on 85 going
Uh-huh.
over,
Uh-huh.
Lake Hartwell, and right close to that town that you tell the story about. So tell me a little bit about the South Carolina history. I think it'd be interesting for
Well,
some of our
they,
audience.
you know, it was kind of a contrast for myself because my dad grew up really with no family, and yet there had been alcoholism in his family, and a lot of people were either not around. But my mom had all these brothers and sisters, and I think there were eight originally that came out from William Barron and Ada Spears Reynolds in Lamar, South Carolina. Two died, I believe, in infancy, and there were six left. But in any case, Don Reynolds was born into a large family, and one of the sisters that he was very close to was a woman named Mary Lou. She became head of the Red Cross in Augusta, Georgia, and she made somewhat of a name for herself. But the only reason I mentioned Mary Lou, Jeff, is that they remained close to each other,
Hmm.
even despite the fact that with all this scandal going on, this was her brother, and she didn't countenance what her brother had done with some of the carousing around and that, but she stuck close to him. I received a telephone call when I was living over in Japan at the time, and my wife said, uh, your aunt Mary Lou's on the phone." And I said, "Oh, okay." And I I said, hello. And she said two words, Buck died. Buck is his, uh, you know, his nickname. Buck died. And before I could say anything, she began to wail and said, pray for his soul. Pray for his soul. Now, here was a brother and sister who loved each other, but here was a man who went off to seek his fortune or to seek whatever he wanted, and his sister remained close to him, but yet she felt from her understanding of God and in the Bible and things like that, that his soul was in jeopardy. Wow. I'll never forget that telephone call. Never. Never.
That's it.
And this, by the way, this goes into what I think your audience might want to ask about, ponder for themselves. What are some of the lessons or some of the questions that we would ask? What about their families? Their family reunions they have, and brother and sister that they don't get together, or there's an aunt and an uncle that are at loggerheads with each other. But how do you preserve family unity? And what is the state of your families today? So that's another question you have.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Boy, that is so true. And I don't think I know another story around this time frame that we've done that has such an intimate family connection, and that someone's done such a beautiful job articulating it. I mean, you really have. You really have. This is a very special story. I mean, not only is it just is such an important historical event, but to give it the personal context and to bring the family into it in the way that you have, I think people will really it's the quintessential example of history is more than just the facts that are in a history book.
Yeah, and it's a memoir. Obviously, there have been biographies written about, not necessarily, the whole book written about Don Reynolds, but there have been chapters written about Don Reynolds. In fact, I have one, the book here, The Spoilers of Democracy. Clark Malinoff. We got two Pulitzer Prize winners writing about my uncle. So yes, the books have been written about my uncle, but this is a memoir. And to bring in the family there, I appreciate that very much.
Is there anything you would have done differently in the research for this book, or the way you wrote it? Are you happy with the way it resulted? I mean, the one thing I would hope is that more people read it, more people get a chance to hear about it today, and on this program and other programs that this will fan out to, I'm sure, and hopefully more people will read it.
Yeah, and there are questions about how we understand history. History. Oh, is that boring? What's the score of the bowl game last night? What we want to see. But indeed, here is an assassination, a seminal event in U.S. history, and as you mentioned, then we have the human side of it wrapped up in that historical event. And then more important, we have questions about the legacy of a president. We have the triumph of the Great Society, right? The tragedy of Vietnam. But is that all the legacy of the 36th president? I mentioned that in the last book. I asked the readership to say no. We need to re-examine, we need to reopen, some historical questions about the legacy of our presidents. In this case, the legacy of President Lyndon Johnson, not necessarily about, let's say, the assassination. Other people may have written books about that. And I did want to say to the audience, I'm not related to Philip F. Nelson, who has written a book.
That's important. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah, Phil Nelson had, I believe he passed away recently, but he has written hundreds of pages about the book, about the assassination of and the mastermind of the assassination. I'm not related to him, but I'm asking that we could re-examine the legacy on another way, on the corruption legacy, the triumph of the Great Society, the tragedy of Vietnam. But what about the tyranny? what about the abuse of power and the weight of the federal government? This could happen to anybody that's listening or looking at your podcast today. See?
Oh, absolutely. I think you're bringing up one of the most important points in terms of the takeaways associated with what
Yeah,
you're trying to achieve here.
yeah.
Uh, is there anything that you feel should be, well, I guess maybe I'll just ask this. Oh, actually, before I get there, and I'll probably have to put this somewhere back in another part of the podcast, but I forgot to ask you about the farmhouse that burned down. And I want to know, do you feel like that there was a sinister element to that?
Yeah.
That's the implication in the
Yeah.
book.
Yeah. It's time change. I did go, by the way, I did go out to the farmhouse. It's obviously not there anymore. And I did ask people, but they had no information. But the circumstances of that are interesting. You have August 27th, 1964. The farmhouse burns down, but wasn't was it September 1st that my uncle started to give more information to the Senate, to the Senate, to the Senate rules. Certainly on December 1st, 1964, there was a formal hearing. So I believe those two, September 1st, 1964, and I believe certainly December 1st, 1964, Don Reynolds was, quote unquote, spilling the beans, so to speak. Was this a last ditch attempt to intimidate him? They never did find out the cause of the farmhouse fire, as far as I know. So,
Yeah, that's interesting. Regarding Johnson and we've talked about the fact that your uncle was an operative, so to speak, a bagman in that regard, working in concert with Bobby Baker in
Bobby
certain
Baker, yeah.
circumstances. Do you think most or a good part of the money went directly to Johnson, or was it really to the Democratic Party? Do you have any sense where it ended up?
Reportedly, it had gone into the 1960 Democratic campaign. So there was an overage of roughly $35,000, and all of a sudden, how come this costs so much? It's not supposed to be that way. That the people were overbilled for that. But that was I believe, the arrangements that my uncle took a cut for himself, and the rest wound up in the 1960 Democratic campaign. Again, I can't trace the paper trail, so to speak, but that's my understanding. That's what was wanted to do.
Well, the IRS, they obviously Hoover and Johnson and everybody, they used the entire process matriculated into an IRS problem for both
Oh my gosh.
your
Yeah.
uncle and Bobby Baker. And did he ever mention that, or was
Yeah.
there any other comments about what they were doing there?
I'm on page 92 of the book. You look at this, but I had seen on these photocopies, made out to, well, it was made out to his wife. Now, again, not to Don Reynolds specifically, and again, there might be reasons that they had separated, or the case may be. But here we are, judgments given out to Geraldine Reynolds, roughly in the amount of, and this is not 1960s dollars here. We're looking at $200,000, which would be potentially what, $2 million today.
Wow. Wow. Wow.
And I don't know how this was done, but she had divorced, and that's part of the thread of the story. That's mercy.
Yeah. Well, obviously the math of it all probably had penalties and all sorts of other crazy, pieces to it. But I think, that's an amazing amount of money. And it also implies that there was quite a bit that they were trying to portray as having come through that process. So,
That's right.
it's the story is actually in some ways economically bigger than some of the more poignant ones you've talked about. There must have been a fairly sizable amount of activity. Um, it's a fascinating story. You are a fascinating storyteller.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Appreciate
it's been a wonderful morning/afternoon with you to hear this story told by you personally. Is there anything else you'd like to tell the audience before we finish up today?
Well, you have AI, right?
I do. Sure.
And this is what AI, who was Don Reynolds? The AI says Bobby Baker viewed Don Reynolds as a witness whose paid testimony was central to the scandal. Okay,
Oh boy.
leading to a cover-up by the Senate Rules Committee to avoid revealing a major scandal. Okay, Reynolds' testimony revealed details of Baker's shady dealings, which in turn exposed a far-reaching scandal that the Senate Rules Committee attempted to hide. There you go.
There you go. That says it all, right? You know, that really does say it all. A lot of people on the Kennedy side of this equation, the assassination, really want the story and school textbooks and other places where particularly younger people get their first connection to it to be appropriately portrayed. And I think it's interesting that you went out and did that on AI to see what AI is saying,
Mhm.
because that will be what the next generation will not turn to a textbook. They're going to turn to their phones, and
There you
they're
go.
going to Google it or turn on their AI app
There you go.
and get it. So what is said there is going to be important. But I know more importantly, you were there and you're setting history straight for everyone. And I can't thank you enough for what you did and what you are still doing. And I hope you'll continue to carry the flag on all of this. I hope you won't be a stranger to us as well. I hope you'll stay in touch and I hope you'll want to connect
Yeah.
with the research community as you see fit. And, I really thank you.
I appreciate that, and even though I'm technically on the corruption road and not on the, we were thrown into history, okay?
Yeah.
And there are still questions regarding the assassination road, and I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to tell the personal story today. Thank you.
You're welcome, Bob. So thank you very much, and I appreciate you being on the show.
Take care, Nigel. Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah. Thank you again for listening today to another episode of JFK, The Enduring Secret interview series. Please join us on a regular basis, and you'll find our podcast at your favorite podcast outlet, as well as our YouTube channel on YouTube. And that's JFK, The Enduring Secret.